Arthur sat quietly in the corner booth of the cafe, staring at the half-full coffee cup in front of him. His fingers tapped slowly against the ceramic, not out of impatience, but habit. He wasn't a man of many words, never had been. He preferred silence, the kind that let him observe, think, and let others talk themselves into trouble. And lately, there'd been a lot to observe, especially when it came to Maria. She wasn't late. She was never late. Maria was the kind of woman who wore her punctuality like perfume, on point, sharp, impossible to ignore. And when she finally walked in, black heels clicking like declarations against the floor, Arthur already knew what kind of conversation they were about to have. He could see it in the tilt of her chin, the shine in her eyes, and the way her phone never left her hand. "There you are," she said, sliding into the seat across from him like the world owed her applause. "You won't believe what happened today." Arthur gave a small smile, that soft kind of nod that said, "Go ahead," even though he already knew where this was going. It always went the same way these days. "Stone, my boss. You know, the one I told you about," she said, already mid-story. "He just bought this insane new office chair, Italian leather, hand-stitched. I mean, who spends $3,000 on a chair?" She laughed. "But that's Stone. He's brilliant, ruthless but smart, like vision for the future kind of smart." Arthur's smile didn't waver. It couldn't. Not when the man she was gushing over was someone he knew a bit too well. Not when the very chair she was swooning about had likely been paid for from an account Arthur discreetly filled every month. Not when Stone, her brilliant, ruthless boss, was actually just the face of a startup that Arthur built from nothing but silence and sweat. Maria stirred her coffee with one hand, the other scrolling through her phone. "He had a meeting with some venture capitalists last week. They ate out of his hand. I swear, Stone could sell air and people would still call him a genius. I've never met anyone like him. Honestly, he's kind of inspiring." Arthur didn't flinch. He couldn't afford to. This wasn't the first time she bragged about her boss. It started as harmless stories, then admiration, then comparison. He watched her shift from telling stories to telling dreams. Dreams where Arthur was always a step behind, and Stone, well, he was always 10 steps ahead. "How's work been for you?" she asked, almost like an afterthought. Arthur blinked. "Same," he said, sipping his coffee. "Just keeping things moving." He didn't mention the 10-hour calls with investors. He didn't bring up the contracts he'd drafted, the warehouses he'd scouted, or the late-night arguments with Stone about branding, direction, control. Arthur wasn't the face of the business, never wanted to be, but he was the backbone. And lately, his spine was cracking from the weight of watching Maria fall for the mask, not the maker. "That's nice," she said, distracted again. "You should meet Stone sometime. I think you'd get along." Arthur held back a chuckle. If only she knew. If only she had the slightest idea that the man she was pushing into his space was the same man he paid to stay in the spotlight. But he didn't say a word. What would be the point? Instead, he changed the subject. "You eat yet?" "No, I was waiting for you. But let's not do the usual. I know this sushi place Stone took us to last week, super exclusive. I could probably get us in." Arthur nodded. "Sure." As they walked out, Maria still talking about the way Stone handled a boardroom like a stage, Arthur let his silence carry him. There was power in silence. He knew that. Power in watching everyone else reveal themselves. And Maria, she was revealing more than she knew. She didn't know the man behind the empire. She only knew the billboard, and Arthur had built it to be convincing, but deep down, something inside him stirred, a tight coil of disappointment and curiosity. He wasn't angry, not yet, but he was paying attention, very closely. The sushi restaurant was all dim lighting and soft jazz, the kind of place where the food portions were tiny, but the bill came with a punch. Maria walked in like she belonged, head high, eyes scanning for recognition. She dropped Stone's name at the entrance, and just like that, the "ow." Hostess smiled wider and waved them in. Arthur didn't comment. He never did. but the quiet inside him deepened. Every time she name-dropped Stone, it felt like she was chiseling away at something fragile between them. Not because she admired another man, admiration was natural, but because she didn't know who she was standing next to. They sat at a secluded table, a cozy little corner that screamed intimacy. But the conversation was anything but. Maria was already midway through another Stone story, this time about how he'd cut a supplier off with just one sentence and walked away with a better deal the next day. "You have to admire that kind of confidence, right?" she said, picking up a piece of sashimi. "Like, he doesn't second-guess himself, ever, and people respect that." Arthur nodded, chewing slowly. He respected Stone, too. At least the version he knew before all this. Before the arrogance. Before the persona. Before the guy started believing he was the business, not just a mouthpiece. He watched Maria closely. She wasn't being cruel. She wasn't mocking Arthur or rubbing anything in. That's what made it worse. This wasn't malicious. It was honest. She truly didn't see Arthur as anything more than her simple, dependable boyfriend. The quiet one. The one who never talked about work, who drove the same old car, who never flashed money or ambition. But she didn't know the late-night wire, transfers, the legal loopholes Arthur covered to protect the company when Stone messed up, the long hours spent building something from code and caffeine. She didn't know that Stone wasn't even on the original LLC paperwork until Arthur added him, quietly, strategically, for show. Arthur felt his phone buzz in his pocket. He checked it under the table. It was Stone. Stone. "Need approval on the new pitch deck. Investors meeting Monday. Can you check tonight?" Arthur slipped the phone back without replying. "You okay?" Maria asked, looking up for the first time. "Yeah," Arthur said. "Just work stuff." She gave a small smile. "You should think about doing more with your career. You're smart, Arthur, but you play everything so safe." He bit the inside of his cheek, nodding like her words didn't cut. Safe. That's how she saw him. She reached across the table, touching his hand. "I just want you to have what you deserve." That made him pause. Because what she didn't realize was he already did. He had power, influence, wealth she couldn't even guess. But he didn't show it, and in her eyes that meant it didn't exist. After dinner, they drove home in silence. Maria scrolled through her phone, showing him a photo of Stone giving a TED-style talk at a business conference. "Isn't he just magnetic?" she said. "I swear people eat out of his hand." Arthur forced a grin. "Yeah, he's good at that." The apartment they shared was small, minimalist, a reflection of Arthur's understated life. He didn't like clutter, not in his home, and not in his words. He watched her as she got ready for bed, laughing softly to herself at something on her phone. Probably another Stone quote. Arthur sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. "Maria," he said quietly, "do you ever wonder how Stone funds all that?" She looked up. "What do you mean?" "His cars, his offices, his lifestyle, the way he moves like he owns everything." She shrugged. "He's just smart, Arthur. Some people know how to play the game." Arthur nodded slowly. "Right. The game." She leaned over, kissing his cheek. "Don't overthink it, babe. You're good the way you are." He smiled, but inside something began to shift. Maybe it was time to show her a different version of himself, the one she never bothered to ask about. Maybe the silent partner was done being silent. The next morning, Arthur woke up before Maria. The room was still dim, the blinds casting soft stripes of sunlight across the walls. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, thinking. Not about Stone, not about the startup, but about the quiet line Maria had crossed without realizing it. The line between love and admiration, between loyalty and fascination. He got dressed. In silence, pulling on a crisp black shirt he hadn't worn in months. Not because it was uncomfortable, but because it drew attention. He wasn't the flashy type, but today he needed to feel sharp, clear-headed, present. Maria stirred behind him. You're up early. Yeah, Arthur said. Got some meetings. On a Saturday? He nodded, not offering more. She didn't push. He left before breakfast, heading not to the office but to the private suite he kept downtown, the one Maria didn't know about. He used it for work. Real work. The kind of meetings that required discretion and distance from the public image Stone projected. By 9 o'clock, Stone was already waiting. Lean, well-dressed, and full of that smug energy Arthur had grown to recognize and resent. Morning, Stone said, kicking his feet up on the glass table like he owned the room. You see the press from yesterday? That podcast blew up. We're trending again. Arthur didn't return the excitement. He opened his laptop, pulled up the investor pitch deck, and slid it across the table. I made a few changes. Your numbers were off. Stone shrugged. Whatever. Investors don't care about precision. They care about story. Arthur looked him dead in the eye. We can't keep running on just story, Stone. At some point, someone's going to ask for the receipts. Stone smirked, that infuriating grin that never quite reached his eyes. That's why you're here, partner. You keep the math clean. I keep the spotlight warm. Arthur leaned back, folding his arms. Speaking of spotlights, Maria's been talking about you a lot lately. Stone raised an eyebrow. Yeah? Arthur didn't like the glint in his eye. Says you're inspiring, confident, that you're going places. Stone laughed. Well, I am. So are you. Just not in the same way. She thinks I'm just some quiet guy working a stable job. No ambition, no risk. Maybe you should show her otherwise. Arthur paused. And maybe you should remember, who signs your paychecks? Stone's smile faltered, just for a split second. That was enough. You're not going to pull rank on me now, are you? He said. After all we built? Arthur stood up. I'm not pulling rank. I'm setting lines. There's a difference. He left without waiting for a reply. On the way out, he called a contact, Anita, his longtime legal advisor and one of the few people who knew the full structure of the company. I need you to look over the partnership agreements again, he said. What's going on? Just making sure I still have control, Arthur replied. And I might want to start shifting the narrative. By the time he got home, Maria was curled up on the couch, watching a live stream. Stone again. He was on stage somewhere giving another talk about innovation and hustle culture. He's amazing, right? Maria said without looking up. Arthur walked over slowly, sat beside her, and gently took the remote. He turned off the TV. What are you doing? She asked, surprised. We need to talk, Arthur said, his voice calm but deliberate. Not about Stone, about me. Maria blinked. Okay. You keep talking about your boss like he's the brain behind everything. But you don't ask what I do. You don't ask why I'm always calm, or why I never complain about money, or why I never talk about work. She shifted, suddenly unsure. Because I'm the reason he's in that spotlight. I'm the one funding him, managing the risk, covering the losses. Every dollar that flows through his hands started in mine. Maria's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. You love the image, Arthur said. But you've never looked behind it. I stayed silent because I didn't care for credit. But watching you brag about a man I made, it's starting to feel like silence is costing me more than it's worth. Maria's voice was quiet. Why didn't you tell me? Because I thought it didn't matter. I thought love didn't need that. But now I'm not so sure. She looked at him then. Really looked, like she was trying to reconcile the man in front of her with the one she thought she knew. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything right now, Arthur said, standing. But you will have to decide what you're really drawn to, the shine or the source. He walked into the other room, leaving her sitting there in silence for once. The next few days passed like a fog. Maria didn't bring up the conversation again, not directly. She moved through the apartment like someone navigating unfamiliar terrain, unsure where to step. She was quieter, more thoughtful, but her silence didn't match Arthur's. His silence had always been steady. Hers now felt loaded, filled with questions she didn't know how to ask. Arthur didn't press. He knew forcing truth on someone who wasn't ready only led to resentment. Instead, he focused on what he did best, working in the shadows. He met Anita again, this time at his private office. She wore her usual dark suit, her expression unreadable, always 3 steps ahead of whoever she was talking to. "You were right to call me," she said, sliding a folder across his desk. "Stone's been slipping. Lavish expenses, unapproved spending, hosting events under the company's name without clearing it through you." Arthur flipped through the pages. "He's been busy." "He thinks he's untouchable," Anita said, "because you let him be." "I wanted him to shine," Arthur replied quietly. "Let him be the face, the voice. That was the deal." "Then he forgot the rest of the deal," she said. "And now he's becoming a problem." Arthur tapped a finger against the file, thinking, "What happens if I pull him out?" "Legally, you can. You have controlling interest. He's a salaried partner, not an owner." "And reputation-wise?" Anita gave a cold smile. "He'll scream, loudly, but it won't hold, especially if you start speaking." Arthur didn't answer right away. The truth was, he hadn't decided what he wanted more, revenge or correction. But every time he walked into his apartment and saw Maria still talking about Stone, still scrolling through his social posts like he was some kind of legend, it chipped away at his patience. That evening, he came home to find Maria on the balcony, a glass of wine in her hand. She turned when she heard him, eyes searching his face for something, maybe answers, maybe forgiveness. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about what you said." Arthur waited. "You're right. I never asked. I just assumed." He nodded. "You assumed I was simple." She didn't deny it. "I saw your calm as comfort, stability. I never thought it meant power. And when I saw Stone, all that flash, I guess I got caught up." Arthur joined her at the railing, looking out over the city. Caught up in what? His image? Or the idea that he was more than me? Maria swallowed hard. Both. They stood there in silence, the city buzzing beneath them. Finally, she said, "Are you going to take him down?" Arthur glanced at her. "Would it bother you if I did?" She hesitated. "I don't know. I guess I'd feel stupid for believing in someone who was just a puppet." "He's not just a puppet. He's got charm, charisma. But without me, he'd be charming people in a back alley trying to sell fake watches." Maria gave a sad smile. "I never meant to disrespect you." "But you did," Arthur said gently. "And not with your words, with your attention. You gave it to a man who hadn't earned it, and you held back from the one who had." She reached for his hand. "Can I fix it?" Arthur looked at her hand for a long second, then took it. "That's not for me to answer. It's for you to prove." She nodded slowly, knowing he wasn't being cruel, just honest. Later that night, as she slept beside him, Arthur stared at the ceiling. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Stone. Stone. "Board's asking questions. Can we get ahead of it?" Arthur typed back. Arthur. "No, let them ask. It's time they hear some answers." He set the phone down, his mind clear for the first time in weeks. Let Stone scramble. Let the board look beyond the smile and find the debt, the ego, the illusion. Arthur was done hiding, and soon the world and Maria would see exactly who had been behind the curtain all along. 2 days later, Arthur stood in front of the boardroom window, looking down at the city as the room filled behind him. The skyline stretched endlessly, shimmering with the ambition of men like Stone, loud, proud, and hollow. But Arthur was different. He didn't build towers to be seen. He built foundations to be felt. The board members filed in, stiff suits and sharper glances. Stone arrived last, carrying his usual confidence like a trophy on his shoulder. He greeted everyone like a star returning to the stage. Grins, nods, finger guns. Arthur didn't turn around. When everyone was seated, he finally spoke. I called this meeting. There are a few things we need to realign before we go forward. Stone leaned back in his chair, smirking. Sure thing, partner. You want to lead with the growth numbers? Arthur faced the room. Let's lead with the truth. He pulled a document from his briefcase and placed it on the table. This company was founded by me, structured by me, funded, built, and protected by me. Stone was brought on for optics, for his energy, his pitch, but as of the last audit, his spending exceeds his contributions by 72%. The room shifted. Eyes darted, brows raised, Stone's smile thinned. Whoa, are we airing private numbers now? Arthur didn't blink. There's nothing private about misuse of company funds. He passed copies around, graphs, emails, receipts. Anita had done her homework well. One of the older board members cleared his throat. This is serious, Arthur. Arthur nodded. That's why I'm here. I've been silent too long, letting charisma outweigh contribution. But I won't let the company sink under the weight of someone else's ego. Stone stood, anger rising. You can't do this. I'm the face of this brand. I'm the reason we're in headlines. Arthur stepped closer, voice calm but firm. You're the reason we're only in headlines. You're noise. I'm structure, and I'm done keeping quiet while you take credit for my work. Another board member spoke up. Are you suggesting we remove Stone? Arthur looked around the table. I'm not suggesting, I'm stating it. Effective immediately, Stone's role will be reevaluated and his access restricted pending a full financial review. Until then, I will act as interim executive lead. Stone's jaw dropped. You son of a... Careful, Arthur cut in, eyes cold. Choose your next words like your next career move, because one will decide the other. The silence that followed wasn't just professional, it was final. Stone stormed out, muttering under his breath, ego dragging behind him like a torn cape. Arthur turned to the board. Let's begin again, properly. The meeting went on, smoother now, with less noise and more clarity. By the time Arthur walked out of that room, the air felt different. Lighter, sharper. He didn't. When he returned home, she was waiting on the couch, phone in hand. It's all over the business blogs, she said. They're calling it a power shift, a hostile correction. Arthur sat down beside her. It wasn't hostile, just overdue. She looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. Not just the man who walked beside her, but the man who could walk over others when necessary. I didn't know you had that in you, she said. He raised an eyebrow. Is that good or bad? She hesitated. It's humbling. He nodded, slowly. It should be. They sat in silence for a while. Then she reached for his hand. I want to understand your world, Arthur, not just look at it from the outside. He squeezed her fingers gently. Then stop chasing the light, Maria. Learn how it's made. And just like that, the balance shifted. Stone was gone. The spotlight was dimmed. And Arthur? He was just getting started. The fallout came fast. In the days following Stone's public removal, the startup community buzzed with gossip, half-truths, and hot takes. Everyone had an opinion. Some said Arthur had been lurking in the background like a snake waiting to strike. Others praised him as a silent genius finally claiming what was his. The headlines were mixed, but Arthur didn't care. He wasn't chasing applause. He was reclaiming control. Stone, predictably, didn't take the fall with grace. He launched a passive-aggressive social media campaign, posting cryptic captions about betrayal, manipulation, and being used by the suits. He did podcasts, called in favors, and tried to spin the narrative. Arthur didn't respond publicly. But behind the scenes, he made sure every accusation Stone lobbed was met with cold, quiet proof. He had facts, timelines, documents. Stone had noise, and noise fades. One afternoon, Anita joined Arthur in his suite with a bottle of scotch and a smirk. He's trying to file a wrongful termination claim. Arthur didn't even look up from his laptop. Let him. He has no legal standing, of course, she said, pouring them both a drink. But he's loud. Arthur finally glanced at her. Then we drown him out with progress. She handed him a glass. You're enjoying this more than you thought, aren't you? He gave a slow smile. I'm enjoying being underestimated less. Maria had been quiet during the storm, observing everything unfold like someone watching the truth burn through old illusions. She no longer mentioned Stone's name, not once. Her admiration had shifted into a strange mix of respect and guilt, and Arthur could feel the tension in her every word. One night, over dinner, she finally asked, "Why did you let him take credit for so long?" Arthur set down his fork. "Because I didn't need the credit, I needed the results." She nodded, then looked away. "Did you ever think I'd see through it?" "I didn't expect you to be blind to it for so long," he admitted. "But I hoped, eventually, you'd ask." Maria winced slightly, then reached across the table. "You deserve more than silence, Arthur. From me, from everyone." He didn't pull away, but his voice was firm. "I don't want more from you. I want what's real. I want to know that if all this was gone tomorrow, you'd still see me." She swallowed hard. "I would." "Would you?" he asked, eyes locked on hers. "Or would you chase the next man with the loudest pitch and shiniest watch?" There was a pause, a real weighted silence between them. Then she stood, walked around the table, and sat beside him. "I know what I did," she whispered. "And I hate that it took this to open my eyes. But I'm not here because of what you own, or what you just proved. I'm here because I finally saw the man I should have never ignored." Arthur studied her face, the sincerity in it. He nodded once, slowly. "I don't forgive easily," he said. "I'm not asking for easy," she replied. "I'm asking for a chance." They sat together after that, the television playing softly in the background, neither of them really watching. The city outside moved as if nothing had changed, but everything had. The next morning, Arthur drafted a press release, not to address the drama, but to introduce a new phase of the company. One where transparency wasn't just branding, one where his name would no longer sit behind the curtain. He signed it Arthur Hale, founder and chief executive officer. For the first time, the world would know who had truly built the empire. And for the first time, Maria stood at his side, not chasing shadows, but standing in the light he had always cast. The official announcement went live at 10 a.m. sharp. By 10:07, Arthur's inbox was flooded. Investors, journalists, former college friends who never bothered to call before. Everyone suddenly remembered his name, his real name. His inbox had never felt so noisy, but strangely, Arthur felt more at peace than ever. He wasn't stepping into the spotlight out of vanity. He was stepping in because he'd earned it. Because silence had protected him long enough, and now it was time to own the narrative. He stood at the tall glass windows of his office, watching the city pulse and thrum with life. The official company channels had just released the founder, profile complete with Arthur's face, calm, serious, sharp in a tailored navy suit. Below it was the story of a man who had architected a tech empire while letting someone else take the praise. The world was eating it up. Maria texted a single line. "You're everywhere." He responded, "I'm just getting started." Anita arrived a little. Later, her expression amused, as always. "Congratulations, CEO. You've officially dethroned your mascot." Arthur glanced up from his screen. He was never the throne, just the paint. She handed him a folder. "There's one more thing. Stone's reached out, not publicly. He sent me a private message for you." Arthur hesitated before opening it. Inside was a printed email. "Arthur, you made your move. Fine, I get it. But you and I both know none of this would have taken off without me in front of the camera. I made your code cool. I made your company sexy. I was the face, and that mattered. You were always going to be the ghost behind the machine. Now you've stepped out, let's see how long they like the man in the shadows. No hard feelings, just don't forget, spotlights burn hot. Stone Arthur read it twice, then handed it back to Anita. Save it, he said. One day I might want to frame it. Or burn it, she chuckled. You know, most people would respond. Arthur looked her dead in the eye. Exactly why I won't. That afternoon, he returned home earlier than usual. Maria was there, sitting, cross-legged on the couch, her laptop open and a cup of tea beside her. She looked up when he walked in, something new in her expression. Pride, maybe. Or something quieter. You've been trending all day, she said. They're calling you the quiet kingmaker. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Not bad. She set her laptop aside. You didn't have to include me in your interviews, but you did. I didn't name names, he said, sitting down beside her. Just said I learned the hard way that being invisible doesn't mean being respected. Maria looked away for a second, the weight of that sentence landing between them. I want to earn my place again, she said. Not just here with you, but in your story, not Stone's, not anyone else's. He nodded slowly. Then start by building something of your own. Something real. She gave a small smile. Can I start with us? Arthur leaned back, exhaling. We'll see. That's not a pitch. That's a long-term investment. Later that night, Maria watched him at his desk, fingers moving with calm certainty across his keyboard, the glow of the screen lighting his face. He wasn't loud. He wasn't performative, but he radiated control. Quiet, unwavering control. She finally understood what power looked like when it didn't have to scream to be felt, and Arthur, for the first time, wasn't hiding what he had built. The man who once stood in the background was now walking to the front, not to demand attention, but to lead without apology. Weeks passed, but the buzz didn't die down. If anything, it evolved. Arthur Hale had become a name people whispered in investor circles and startup lounges, not because he chased the spotlight, but because he made it feel earned. The silent partner narrative fascinated everyone. Journalists called him an enigma. Competitors called him a problem. And Stone? Stone had gone silent. The louder Arthur became, the quieter Stone faded into irrelevance. Arthur didn't revel in any of it. He watched from a distance like a craftsman, inspecting his own sculpture from the shadows. It wasn't ego, it was satisfaction. This empire, this influence, the loyalty forming around his leadership, it all came without a raised voice. He hadn't just won. He had changed the rules. One Thursday evening, Maria approached him with a small box in hand. She seemed nervous, and Maria rarely looked nervous. She handed it to him wordlessly. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, old school, heavy in the hands. He opened it. The first page read, Everything I missed, everything I want to fix. Arthur looked up at her. It's a journal, she said. I've been writing in it since the day you took back the company. I needed to understand what I overlooked, not just in you, but in myself. He flipped through the pages, honest reflections, harsh ones, a few lines about Stone that stung, with clarity. I wasn't blinded by his money, she had written. I was blinded by what his money looked like, loud, fast, shiny. I didn't realize how powerful quiet wealth could be, how dangerous it is to underestimate someone who doesn't need to perform for your attention. Arthur closed the notebook and looked at her. You're trying. I am. And you're not trying just to win me back? No, she said, shaking her head. I'm trying to become someone you'd choose again, not someone you tolerated. He studied her a moment longer, then finally nodded. Good, he said. Then we'll see. Later, as they walked through the city, just the two of them, no headlines or glamour, Arthur noticed how differently people reacted to him now. Strangers nodded in recognition. Others whispered as he passed. But Maria, this time, didn't look starstruck. She looked grounded. She didn't reach for his hand out of pride, but out of connection. That weekend, he received an invite to a private event, an exclusive roundtable for elite founders. When he walked in, the host introduced him not as a newcomer, but as the man who built from the shadows and stepped into the fire. Arthur gave a short speech, not about success, not about power, but about the cost of letting someone else wear your name, your story, your credit. He ended with a line that stayed with every person in that room. Never confuse silence with absence. Some of us just prefer to build the storm before we become it. The applause was quiet, respectful. The kind of clapping that didn't beg for show. It simply meant, we see you now. After the event, Maria met him outside. She held up her phone. You're trending again. Arthur smiled. Let them talk. She slid her phone away and looked at him. And you? You finally ready to talk too? Arthur wrapped an arm around her shoulders as they walked. I've said enough, he replied. Now it's time to do. And just like that, Arthur Hale, the man who once stood in the shadows while his girlfriend bragged about another, became the man no one would ever overlook again. Not the industry. Not the city, not Maria, not ever.